Now to the power play over video games. Attorney General Michael Atkinson has used what he describes as a veto power over possible changes to classification laws. Video gamers say he has no right to enforce his views on the wider community. But child development experts say there is a link between violent games and violent behaviour. Leah McLennan reports.
In Australia, video games are a $1.3 billion industry, and in Adelaide, Mark Limburg is one of thousands of people who loves playing them. But he says the state government is getting in the way of his enjoyment.
I made the decision that I would stop gaming myself, and each hour that I would normally spend in a game, I'd spend trying to educate people about the issues itself, just so we can get to that first step of actually having rational discussion within the government about it.
That discussion centres on a class of computer games that are at the heart of some serious political power play between the states and between gamers and South Australia's Attorney General Michael Atkinson. It's all to do with R ratings and violent video games.
Attorneys General years ago decided that there shouldn't be an R18 plus category for computer games because they were interactive and they had higher impact than film or cinema, that it was difficult to prevent children accessing computer games in the home. And so for those reasons it was decided that Australia didn't really need a R18 plus category for computer games.
That means the types of games that can be legally played in Australia are a whole lot tamer than those available overseas. Australia's Attorneys General have agreed to review the ban on R-rated games, but without unanimous agreement, the law can't be changed. It's Michael Atkinson who's been using his veto powers, and he says he's doing it because there are links between violent games and violent acts.
I'm sure most people can distinguish the fantasy of a computer game from the reality, but it's the small number we know can't that leads to mass murder in American high schools, and in Thailand last year led to a gamer playing out the fantasy of hijacking a taxi cab and murdering the driver. It happened.
The idea that something shown to us and interactive with us is somehow more affecting of our youth than, say, for example, our own imaginations, which is what the whole play on a game and on movies is, certainly on literature, is insane. It's been proven again and again and again not to be the case.
The idea that video games with explicit content have a negative influence on young people is supported by Young Media Australia. The group's Vice President, Elizabeth Hansley, says she supports Michael Atkinson's view on R-rated games.
It can increase a person's tendency to be violent or to want to solve conflict with violence. Secondly, and perhaps most importantly, it can increase people's acceptance of violence and make them more tolerant of violence, so desensitise children to violence. And again, the interactive aspect of video games just heightens that effect.
For the gamers, though, the issue is not just a game. They argue it's a question of personal freedoms and censorship. Ben Kilsby says it's also a question of creative development and Australia being part of a wider world. He's one of the owners of Hollow Point Development Studios in Adelaide, which develops video games. Mr Kilsby says it's unlikely his company would produce R-rated games, but there is a wide section of the gaming community that wants them to be allowed.
The average age of an Australian gamer is actually 30 years old, and the adult gamers have been playing games on average for about 11 years. So we're talking about a very mature audience already that exists in video games. And there are sections of that audience that would like to be able to have access to higher levels of mature content.
I have 3 sons who are avid gamers and disagree strongly with my position. I've seen them playing games for years, including Grand Theft Auto. There was one version of Grand Theft Auto where a group of singing Hare Krishnas were run down on the pavement by the gamer motorist, and points were scored for doing that.
I blame Michael Atkinson, the Attorney General of South
It's not just local gamers that are calling for the Attorney General to change his mind. Australia is one of the only countries in the developed world that doesn't have an R rating. That sparked outrage that's been vented in both local and international blogs.
Certainly the discussions that have been happening online and through social networks and in LAN parties and social gatherings all across the country, it's a hot topic at the moment, absolutely.
I think the Western industrialised countries that allow R18 plus computer games and the extreme violence that goes with them are just so many Gadarene swine going over the cliff. And I'm pleased that Australia has a principled, sensible stand against this extreme violence. I'm happy for Australia to stand alone, and international gamers can laugh at us all they like.
But many gamers say an R classification would actually protect most children from explicit content. Mark Limburg says international game developers are modifying their product for Australia, so they just scrape in with an MA rating. But if the R rating was available, those games would be illegal for children to buy, and parents would be more aware of the content.
I would much rather see that game not be altered and placed within an R rating so that it can be managed correctly, rather than it being slightly watered down in one area, but still be a bit extreme, and then have the MA rating.
So far, Michael Atkinson is the only Attorney General to use his veto powers to stall the issue. Some Attorneys General support a change in the law, including Victoria's Rob Hulls. He's gone on the record as saying that it seems inconsistent that adults are allowed to view adult-only films, but not computer games with equivalent content. But Mr Atkinson says there are at least 2 other Attorneys General who would support him on the issue.
Some gamers have suggested I should be eliminated as an Attorney General, whatever that means. But were I eliminated, I'm sure there's other Australian Attorneys General who would step forward and veto R18 plus computer games.
Gamers say Australia's gaming industry is trying to come of age, and without an R rating, it's unlikely to be on a level playing field with the rest of the world. Mark Limburg says Mr Atkinson has a right to his opinion, but not to stop the debate.
South Australia was established based upon the principles of freedom and on democracy. This is the first place that women got the right to have a voice and a vote. It's the height of irony that one man's opinion is stopping that process in this state.
The spring racing